Glaciers hundreds of kilometers in height covered the Earth, right up to the shores of the Mediterranean. It was in this extreme environment that two great predators made an alliance that changed our destiny for always. By becoming partners with wolves, Cro-Magnon humans took a path which transformed them into modern humans. And becoming partners with mankind, wolves took a path which led them to become dogs. This meeting changed the lives of humans and wolves, each finding in the other the qualities needed to complete complex tasks. They put in common their abilities to coordinate their actions to survive and develop. But the wolf isn't the only canid able to work in a group. All over the world, wild canids put their strength together to survive. Unfortunately, this aptitude which seduced Cro-Magnon man 20,000 years ago has nowadays become a threat to canids and humans living together. In Australia, is it possible for farmers and dingoes to live together? In Africa, how can black-backed jackals manage to avoid the farmers' guns? And on the same continent, what place is left for African wild dogs as they see their natural spaces diminish? In the African savannah, everyone knows the 5 animal superstars of safaris: the buffalo, the leopard, the rhinoceros, the elephant, and the most famous, the lion. While it captures the attention of tourists by its superb size and 200 kilograms of muscles and claws, this top predator has to compete with a surprising animal 10 times lighter: the wild dog. It's hard to imagine that this canid, a little smaller than a Dalmatian, is actually one of the most feared predators of Africa. When it attacks, most of the time its hunt is crowned with success. Wild dogs hunt in a group, and their technique is formidable. After encircling the wildebeest, they cut out an individual to kill it. It's a technique they share with wolves, but also with other canids that work in a pack. As with other canids, wild dog claws can't be retracted. But unlike those others, it only has 4 digits on its paws, whereas its cousins have 5. And although it proudly displays the canine teeth which give the canids their name, it has 2 less teeth than the others. That being said, 40 teeth and a powerful jaw are easily enough to tear meat. Adapted to the warm, dry climate of southern Africa, it has large ears to help regulate its body temperature. Irrigated by many blood vessels, they allow warm blood to release heat into the air, which is slightly less warm. It is never seen to drink, even when it washes. It seems to have little need for water, and it gets what it needs through eating. It's a social animal that lives in a pack, organized around an alpha couple. While in the past, scientists have described packs which could have up to 100 individuals. Unfortunately, nowadays, packs have rarely more than 20 wild dogs. They are nomads, and so they occupy immense territories, up to 2,500 square kilometers. Skilled at endurance races, they cross these territories according to their hunts and the presence of prey, never staying more than 2 or 3 months in the same zone. In Australia, there is another canid, which needs a lot of space to live in. The dingo. In the family of canids, this is the closest to the domestic dog. It looks like a kind of Malinois shepherd with a sandy colour, thin and lanky. It's hard to believe that it's a wild animal when you see it at the roadside. However, it's a formidable predator. Since the disappearance of the Tasmanian wolf at the start of the 20th century, it's the only large predator in Australia. The only animal able to hunt the large herbivores introduced by colonists and which cause immense damage by eating plants. Like the surf, kangaroos, boomerangs and koalas, it is often seen on postcards for tourists. The dingo is an emblem of Australia. It's even more true at Fraser Island. On this island paradise, the largest sandy island in the world, found on the east coast of Australia, around 200 dingoes share 1,500 square kilometres of white sand and lagoons. Fraser Island is one of the rare places where dingoes can be found that haven't crossbred with domestic dogs. Everywhere else, hybridization between dingoes and domestic dogs threaten the survival of the species. Hybrid dogs have more young and are replacing dingoes little by little. Some forecasts say the dingo will disappear in 30 years. This is certainly not one of the great predators. It seems tiny and insignificant beside the giants of Africa. It has to be said that the black-backed jackal doesn't get many points on that scale. Its size isn't much bigger than a Jack Russell, and its feeding opportunism, sometimes a hunter, sometimes a thief, or a rubbish eater, don't make it seem a noble animal. The worst thing for its reputation is its rather too pronounced taste for smaller cattle, which push farmers to make war on it without mercy. So to avoid the guns, some black-backed jackals seek refuge far from humans, in extreme and inhospitable environments, like this part of Nigeria called Skeleton Coast. Far from the beaches of Fraser Island, Skeleton Coast is nothing like a paradise. The only way to get there is to cross a swamp of 100 kilometers, which in its turn can only be reached through a hot and arid desert. So, for black-backed jackals in exile, after this terrible journey, Skeleton Coast could seem a safe harbor. Especially since it shelters large colonies of seals. In spring, these gather to bear and raise their young, to the delight of the black-backed jackals. But even if they seem vulnerable and defenseless, hunting young seals isn't a certain thing. The babies weigh more than 4 kilograms, nearly half the size of an adult jackal. And their thick hide protects them effectively from bites. Newly arrived jackals have to pay for this. On this distant coast, there are almost no other predators, so it's impossible to compete for the role of carrion eater by letting other species do the work. If the jackals want to eat, they have to hunt. Or at least some of them have to. Hunting seals asks for strategies and ruses which black-backed jackal have not developed elsewhere. To fool the watchful seals, they use a scent camouflage to hide their odor and approach their prey discreetly. It's an efficient strategy. It lets the jackal catch the desired prey. But as soon as one of them captures a young seal, the carrion-eater instinct of the others reappears. Hunting and defending its meal, that's a lot of energy for one jackal. So it has to put up with sharing the prize with its colleagues. Black-backed jackals aren't the only ones to suffer from proximity to humans, pushing them to flee. For wild dogs as well, living together with humans is difficult. They are subject to illegal trapping campaigns to limit their population. Moreover, they are particularly sensitive to diseases transmitted by domestic dogs. These illnesses can turn into epidemics and exterminate up to 90% of a population. With around 3,000 individuals left, today they are one of the most threatened carnivores in Africa. To preserve the species, the Wild Dog Foundation, a foundation for preserving wild dogs, is leading an unprecedented protection campaign. This organization collects and treats wild dogs that are trapped by poachers. But what to do when the animal recovers? In the treatment center, 6 orphans have never known life in the wild. Releasing them into the wild they came from can't be considered. Their chances of joining a pack are almost nil, and single wild dogs don't last long. Peter Blinston decided to try an unusual approach. Was it possible to get the 6 orphans to form a solid pack? To do that, they were transferred to an isolated island of Lake Kariba on the Zimbabwe and Kenya border. There they are safe from predators and humans. The young wild dogs find wildlife for the first time. They know each other because they grew up side by side in the treatment center. But captivity didn't let them develop the social behavior of their species. Now they are free. Will they manage to form a pack? Especially learn how to feed themselves without human intervention? Knowing how to hunt is a vital thing for any predator. But that apprenticeship is especially complex for wild dogs because they have taken the idea of the team to its limits. In Zimbabwe, the dominant female of a pack of wild dogs gave birth to a dozen pups. In the shelter of a bush, she made a den for the young. For several weeks, they stayed hidden until they were large enough to come out. Even if only the alpha couple reproduce, all of the pack take part in the education of the young. For these social animals, group cohesion is learned from the earliest age thanks to play. After being nursed for several weeks, the young are now big enough to eat meat. It's a critical time for these nomadic predators. The presence of pups forces the adults to become sedentary for over a month. Quickly, prey is less common in the area, and going hunting asks for more and more distance and using more and more energy. The young are hungry. They hide their impatience by chewing branches, but that won't keep them busy for long. So it's time to go hunting. It's a serious decision which is taken together and follows a ritual. Everything starts with a cough. Really, it's a test of the motivation of the pack members. Do they want to hunt? A cough in return means yes. Silence is a no. This decision-making method is the equivalent of a referendum. By closely observing this phenomenon, Researchers realized that the number of voices needed to reach a quorum depends on the status of the wild dogs in the pack. The opinion of an alpha dog counts for much more than a dominated wild dog. When the quorum is reached, all the pack goes hunting. In the den, only the alpha female and a young male stay to watch over the young. So in a case of danger, the pups are less protected. In a group, wild dogs can face up to the biggest predators, but alone they become easy prey. The spotted hyena is a formidable predator. Twice as big as an adult wild dog, it'll just make a mouthful of this careless young dog which has strayed from the den. Without the protection of the pack, neither the female nor the young male can stop its attack. "15 kilometers from there, the pack is on the track of a warthog. If they manage to catch up with it, its chances of survival are very thin. It's likely that wild dog democracy plays a role in the efficiency of the hunt. Each member adheres to the group's decision. The pack is fully motivated and partnership is reinforced. The technique is remarkable. The wild dogs push their prey into making large circles. They manage to relay the hunt until the animal is exhausted, which makes killing it easier. The prey is devoured there and then. The aim is to eat as much meat as possible, as quickly as possible, to stop it from being stolen by other predators. Once their stomachs are full, they cross the 15 kilometers between there and the den where they are expected. To bring the food back for the young, they have swallowed enormous quantities of meat which they regurgitate once arrived. There again, solidarity is in place and follows this rule: the weakest eat first. The young who eat first. Then comes the female and the young male who have stayed in the den. This altruism is found in every aspect of the social life of wild dogs, who take care of every member of the pack, even old, wounded, or sick members when they can no longer hunt. Without having developed as far-reaching a socialization as that of the wild dogs, dingoes are also canids which are organized in a pack. And like their African cousins, they join forces to capture prey they could not hunt alone. Here, the group is attacking a herd of water buffaloes, one of the largest herbivores introduced by humans to Australia. The size difference is striking. A blow from a hoof or a horn is enough to kill one of the dingoes. But the canids act together to try and isolate the young buffalo and kill it. The social behavior of the dingo is particularly flexible. It can live alone, in a couple, or in a pack. Several packs can even act together during a hunt to capture large animals. They disperse later when the time comes to reproduce. Hidden in a den, the female gives birth to a litter of up to 8 young. The Aborigines thought that the number of young in the dingo litter could predict drought. The more young there were, the drier the weather would be. This belief shows clearly the relationship which existed between humans and the canid in Australia. A proximity which was carved in cave walls several thousand years ago. For a long time, the Aborigines and the dingoes lived together, even in their most intimate moments. The dingo is the only large predator in Australia. That is to say that some consider it to be a keystone species, that its presence has a beneficial effect on the ecosystem. In any case, it's the only animal which can limit the population of large herbivores. But in a country with 70 million sheep, such a predator may not have a good reputation. To protect the flocks from the dingo, Australians have taken up the construction of the largest artificial barrier in the world, the dingo fence, which extends for over 6,000 kilometres. Visible from space, this enclosure separates Australia in 2 different ecosystems. One where dingoes live, the other where they are clearly not welcome. But this separation is not without consequences for the environment. In any case, that's what the studies of Mike Letnick suggest.
For many years I was working out in the desert in Australia, and we had to drive on these long journeys across the dingo fence, and one of the most stark things was that the dunes were actually a different shape on each side of the fence. On the dingo side of the fence, the dunes were much broader. And when you walked in those dunes, you could feel that. There was much more loose sand. They were much harder to walk up. Whereas on the no dingo side of the fence, the dunes were taller and narrower, and the sand was much firmer, and it was much easier to walk around.
Mike wanted to confirm his impressions scientifically, so he decided to film the landscape with a drone on either side of the fence. Then he modelized the images on his computer and proved there was a significant difference in the size and shape of dunes. But how can the presence or not of the dingo influence the landscape, the structure of sand and vegetation? This is what Mike is seeking to understand.
So I decided to do a study to formally look at the effects of dingoes and removing them from ecosystems in Australia.
For Mike and his team, the task is immense. It means comparing 2 complete ecosystems to account precisely for each animal in function of its place in the food chain, and also each plant, every bush. During his research, Mike realized that the absence of dingoes brought about a chain of consequences. Less dingoes meant more kangaroos, and also more foxes and domestic cats gone wild. More cats and foxes mean less marsupial mice. However, marsupial mice nibble at young sprouts of trees and the roots of bushes, limiting their growth. When there's a lot of bushes and trees, they fix the sand, making it more solid.
The main conclusion from our work was that dingoes have these enormous effects on Australian ecosystems, and they literally shape the desert. So that where there's no dingoes, there's massive differences in the communities of animals and plants. And those differences extend across vast areas, and they extend to the biodiversity value of landscape. So having dingoes in the landscape makes for much more biodiverse landscapes, much more sustainable landscapes.
To protect themselves from dingoes, farmers have hunted them out of a large part of Australia, impoverishing the ecosystem at the same time. This situation is repeated in South Africa, where most farmers try to eliminate the black-backed jackal. But another approach is possible, and that is what G.E.I.E is trying in his farm at Loxton.
I'm absolutely passionate about the animal. It's so adaptive. We've put people on the moon, but coming back to farmland, and we got this little animal, and that it does outsmart it, the human race at so many places.
Thanks to his great knowledge of the black-backed jackal, Neil developed methods of non-lethal protection. Now he crisscrosses South Africa to share his knowledge with other farmers. The type of fence to put around enclosures, collars which have odors the jackals find repellent. All these measures allow farmers to live together with the predators. But the most efficient protection that he can offer to his flock is also the simplest. And he owes this to his understanding of the predator's behavior.
After a lot of walking and stalking around here, I eventually found the den, and the den was at that time active. But the nice thing about when you find these locations on your farm is that the jackal will keep on coming back and to this den every year. I do monitor these dens on a continuous basis, year in and year out. I use the trail cams. So I got a continual visual on what actually is going on at the denning site. Yeah, it would be absolutely stupid to come and bring your livestock here and start lambing here, because you're going to have a lot of losses. So that's the reason that I'm moving away totally, about 2-3 kilometers from here.
On the Namibian Skeleton Coast, the young seals have grown. They now weigh more than 10 kilos and are heavier than an adult black-backed jackal. Now it's impossible to hunt them alone. Unfortunately, they're the only prey available. And even if some rare brown hyenas roam on the beach, there's no hope of snacking on what they leave. When a brown hyena eats a seal, not even the bones remain. Once again, to survive, the canids of Skeleton Coast have to be inventive. The social organization of the jackals is simple. A short courtship display allows the male to show his intentions. If the attraction is mutual, a couple forms. Taking advantage of this complicity, the black-backed jackals here are inspired by their canid cousins. Like dingoes in Australia and the wild dogs of Africa, they have learnt to coordinate their actions. By surrounding the seals, they try to draw the young away from their mother's protection. One distracts the adult, while the other tries to isolate the young one. As a pair, they manage to take a young seal far from the colony. This teamwork is remarkable for a jackal which usually hunts small prey alone. It brings a big advantage in relation to competing jackals. While the male enjoys the fruit of the hunt, the female protects against carrion eaters, and vice versa. This partnership works because black-backed jackals form united couples. Once they have found each other, they stay together for life. Sheltered in a den, they both raise their young which stay with them for around 8 months. This is an exceptionally long time, but allows the adults to transmit hunting techniques. To teach their young the secrets of seal hunting, the adults at first isolate an individual from the rest of the colony. Then they let the young train on the prey, while keeping an eye on the other jackals, which won't be slow to come and bother them. Because at the end of the season, hunger is strong. As soon as they have killed their prey, a horde of starving jackals will hurry to steal it. Even if the family help each other to keep their meal, the number of thieves is too great, and they have to abandon the prey. For wild dogs as well, learning to hunt is essential. But even more than for the black-backed jackal, cooperation is essential. This is the concern of Peter Blinston and the 6 wild dogs newly arrived on the island of Lake Kariba.
in some of the game, the impala and waterbuck, but we haven't seen them actually chase anything.
The impala probably know that the dogs are here, but the dogs haven't registered that impala are a food source for them, I don't think.
But he's only a yearling, so he also doesn't have very much experience.
They've tried, yeah?
We have to keep providing them with food if they're not providing for themselves, just to give them the time to adapt to being in the wild and recognising that the waterbuck and impala are a food source and that they have to learn how to catch it.
But with each day that passes, Peter is more and more worried. The wild dogs still don't hunt. So he tries to stimulate their instincts by getting them to run after their food, without improving the situation. The last solution might be to stop feeding them, hoping that hunger reawakes their instinct. That's a difficult decision to take, especially for Peter, who has fed these animals since they arrived at the centre. So that the lack of food doesn't endanger the wild dogs, he watches them closely. And so he watches their first attempt. But the waterbuck is a tough prey for inexperienced wild dogs. There has to be a wait of 4 days for the wild dogs to try again, this time attacking a young impala. For the first time, they act as a pack and find their hunting instincts. The hunt is finally a success. While the jackals and the wild dogs seem to have found a refuge far from humans, for dingoes, the solution is perhaps to be found around them. Rather than wearing himself out hunting them off his farm at Nimbodia in eastern Australia, John Cooper has chosen to go to the canids by raising his own pack. Thereby he ensures that no wild dingo will come on the territory of his group, effectively protecting his flocks of sheep.
Come on, Pete, baby. You're so good. You lovely dingo, baby. Go on.
John and his dingoes illustrate clearly the ambiguity of the status of the canid in Australia. Arriving 4,000 years ago with humans, is the dingo, as its detractors think, the first feral species in Australia? That means a domestic species returned to the wild. Or is it the last great predator still present on the island? The question is important. If it's considered to be wild, the dingo should be protected like other wild species. But if it's feral, it can be hunted like other exotic invasive species. The answer to this very divisive question can perhaps be found in the distant and inaccessible highlands of eastern Papua New Guinea, with another wild canid which could be the ancestor of the dingo, the New Guinea singing dog. Nobody had seen this canid in the wild since 1950, and it was thought extinct. But in 2016, one of the workers at a mine lost in the depths of western Papua New Guinea put a video online of a dog whose song was almost harmonious, not at all like the barking of domestic dogs. That was all it took for Professor James McIntyre to organise an expedition. His objective? To bring back samples and study this species of canid genetically. The zone is particularly difficult to get to, with virgin forest rising to 4,000 meters altitude. An alliance of forest and high mountains. Finding an animal in these immense hostile spaces could seem impossible, but the perseverance of John and his team paid off. After 2 weeks of searching, one of the cameras caught the first pictures. As things went along, encounters became more and more frequent. Now one of the dogs had to be captured to take a sample of DNA. To attract the singing dog into the trap, John used a scented bait based on the pheromones of females in heat.
That's good.
A camera watched the trap permanently to warn the researchers of any event. For in these conditions, the dog absolutely couldn't stay too long in the cage. The captured dog is measured, weighed and photographed from every angle. The researchers take several samples to allow further analysis. It is fitted with a GPS collar and taken back to the place where it was found. John McIntyre's expedition shows the story of this species in a new light, and through that, the dingo's story. The singing dog is a species that comes from the first domesticated dogs. The comparison of these two animals seems to indicate that the dingo became a distinct species 10,000 years ago. While it doesn't finally answer the question of the dingo, this new study reinforces the legitimacy of its presence in Australia. From Australia to southern Africa, the survival of canids is compromised by our difficulty to live alongside them. By their own initiative, or with the help of scientists, they find refuge in protected spaces far from humans. Will we manage to live with these animals, which communicate and work in partnership, educate their young, and transmit their savoir-faire? A little like us in some ways.